We're live. Great. I feel like these weeks just come around so quickly. It's
They
like
do.
12 o'clock and we're like, oh my goodness, it's record live. It's exciting. But yeah, it's been a busy week as always.
Deadline week this week.
Yes, it is. Trying to
So
get
lots to do
across the line. Yeah, lots to do.
Trying to finish my editorial. I know you're waiting for it to put it in the file.
It's a different kind of stress when you're waiting on someone who doesn't understand the deadline aspect of your job versus waiting on someone who knows that if it's not in by 12 o'clock on Monday, then, the sky will fall. So it's okay.
Well, that's right. It's my problem. If it doesn't come in, I'm creating problems for myself. So you can guarantee it'll come in. It just it doesn't always happen as quickly each week to week.
Yeah. I find that just on that note, productivity and creativity in that sense aren't always very good friends. It's like some weeks you can write an editorial in like 20 minutes, it's done. And other weeks it's like 2 days, 3 days. It's just,
yep.
Yeah. Any like sneak hints about what this one's going to be about?
I think we touched on it briefly last week. If you were watching Record Live last week, you may have heard us talk about the nature of Jesus or the characteristics of Jesus and how people relate to him in different ways. And I think that's what it's going to be about. At least I've made a hefty start in that direction. So
amazing.
That's the plan. Hopefully it all comes together this afternoon or tomorrow, and yeah, we can get it in that May 1 issue.
I'm sure it will. On that note, I suppose I know I'm not gonna like overdo this too much, but that poll, we actually asked a poll of some of our readers and our community about the character of Jesus, whether you saw meek and mild or more of like a heroic Lion of Judah figure. And it was an interesting response. And I know you're going to reflect on that, so I won't spoil it. But actually, our topic today also stems from a thought that was published that I wrote about in the email last week. So if you guys want to get sort of like the sneak preview of everything we're going to talk about, or if you want to be in the know, definitely subscribe to that email. I always post a link just after the conversation finishes, just because it's like multitasking while we're doing it. So just stay tuned for that. Anything else we'd like to talk about or announce before we dive into today's juicy topic?
I mean, definitely get the email, because if you miss this conversation, we always remind people what we've talked about in the email each week. And there's always good stuff in there, breaking news, links to our other platforms. So it's exciting to stay in touch.
Yeah. Do you feel ready for this convo?
I feel okay. I feel maybe ready. I don't know if I look ready. My eye is having a problem at the moment. I don't know if it's an ingrown eyelash or something. So it's a bit, if it looks a bit like my eyes are half shut, it's actually just because my eyelid is swollen. And luckily it's on that side. It's not as easy to see. So I'll sit like this a bit. But I'm ready. I'm ready to go. I'll put my good side forward.
Amazing. So for those who have read the title, which I'm sure is all of you, I don't know why I say that. Of course you've read the title. Today we're talking about people leaving the church, and this is a difficult topic, and I know a lot of our audience are either in this category or know someone in this category. It's a very common thing that happens. People leave the Adventist church or the Christian church in general. And this topic was inspired actually by a poem. I recently started listening to this new podcast. So if you want podcast recommendations, mine would be one called Poetry Unbound. And I wanted to play you on Spotify just the audio of this poem because it's narrated by an Irishman. His name is Padraig Tuma. And he's just so amazing, but couldn't figure it out with StreamYard. So I'm just going to read it to you. And that will sort of set the tone for our conversation today. So
good way to start a Record Live, Mary Ellen, with a bit of poetry.
I think so.
We're a cultured show.
We are a cultured show. Yes. The poem is called All My Friends Are Finding New Beliefs, and it's written by Christian Wyman. So it says, all my friends are finding new beliefs. This one converts to Catholicism and this one to trees. In a highly literary and hitherto religiously indifferent Jew, God whomps on like a genetic generator. Paleo, keto, zone, South Beach, bourbon, exercise regimes so extreme she merges with machine. One man marries a woman 20 years younger and twice in one brunch uses the word verdant. Another's brick-fisted belligerence gentles into dementia, and one, after a decade of finial feints and teasers, like a sandpiper at the edge of the sea, decides to die. Priesthoods and beasthoods, sombers and glees, high-styled renunciations and avocations of dirt, sobrieties, satieties, pilgrimages to the very bowels of being. All my friends are finding new beliefs, and I am finding it harder and harder to keep track of all the new gods and the new loves and the old gods and the old loves. And the days have daggers and the mirrors motives, and the planets turning faster and faster in the blackness, and my nights and my doubts. And my friends, my beautiful, credible friends. So,
Wow.
I really loved that poem, and I'm sure that there's many messages we could draw out of that, but it's essentially about this man who's sort of in his mid to later life, and he's looking for that meaning in life, and all his friends, he's looking around at all his friends, and they're striving for all that meaning in life, and a lot of them are giving up traditional religion and going after trees or going after new diets or all these things to try and find meaning. And it just makes me question whether our churches have any relevance anymore in this day and age where your own truth is your own truth. Like there's no objective truth anymore. What do you think, Jared?
It's interesting the way the poet sort of equates some of those categories with gods or beliefs. You know, it's a religious poem in some senses, a spiritual poem, but it's not all of those things are religious or spiritual. We wouldn't think of them in such a way. The gym idea, you know, the woman who becomes one with the machine because she's always at the gym. South Beach and bourbon and stuff. It's definitely finding meaning in different things. That comes through really clearly. But it's interesting to me, and I guess you tied this up in your piece for the e-newsletter, about how we can chase after meaning in certain things, and those things can become gods in our lives. You know, he has the line about old gods and new gods and that sort of thing, and following after whatever the latest trend and fad is. I also heard in there some of the whisperings of sort of the polarization of people and him maybe struggling to keep up with who believes what and some of the things that we believe in this day and age, you know, the conversations around conspiracy and politics and things. People are becoming extremer in their views, and you could almost sense the author's trepidation to like tread on anyone's toes by putting his foot in his mouth and saying the wrong thing about their newfound beliefs, you know, their particular things. But he also, I guess, at the end wraps up with the idea of paying homage to the friends that he has by calling them his beautiful, credible friends. I guess he's suggesting that there is something that they find that is potentially to be gained from each and every one of them, you know, something valuable and something that comes out of that.
It's interesting that he uses the word credible, because credible seems to mean that you sort of know what you believe and you've got a foundation for that, but he almost says the opposite in the beginning of the poem. So I sort of interpret that as being like just searching in and of itself is like it's a good thing, even if it we're going to talk about this, but
maybe he's being ironic or sarcastic.
Maybe he's being ironic, I
think everyone who reads the poem will come away with different layers of meaning, potentially.
That's the beauty of poetry.
From it. That is the beauty of poetry.
Yeah. But I wonder if sometimes as people who don't leave the church, if we judge others who do leave, and we don't think they're credible for searching because they're leaving the objective truth. Yeah. There's some
and I think there's a danger, or there's something that we need to be aware of, is that we may be right. We may, in fact, have it right and have the truth and all of that. That's fine. But how do we treat those who do leave or have left, and do we give them an opportunity to return? Because if we burn the bridges that they leave, if we other them, and often I think people that do leave the church get fairly harshly judged. I was looking at a report just now. This is an Adventist report, an Adventist study over sort of 50 years. They've noticed how many people were leaving the church and stuff. And they were asking the questions of, is there any possibility of those people coming back? I can't find where I had that information just now, but the idea was that there is a chance, and it just depends on how they're treated and how I think I've got it here. Basically the findings found that they were willing to, majority of them were willing to potentially give it another go if they found the right connection and stuff. So an interesting sort of idea for us to think about. How do we treat those, or keep the door open for those who have left? I know in the islands, it's common, they talk a lot about backsliders. There's sort of, everybody knows who's a backslider and who's not a backslider. And anyway, the backsliders that I've interacted with or heard speak of, others speak about, there is an openness and there is a willingness to return. And sometimes it's like, the timing's not right, or I'm enjoying doing these things that the church doesn't approve of too much right now, but I know where the truth is. I know where my sort of spiritual home, my roots are, and I'll return when I can. But it's an interesting idea to sort of, we must frame our thoughts around people who are no longer in the church as compassionately and as openly as we can, so that we can continue those relationships.
I think, from my observations at least, there's only a very small percentage of people that leave the church because they reject God. I'd say the vast majority of people leave the church not because they actively reject God, but just because other things take more precedence, or because they don't like the Christians who represent God in such a backwards way. And that is definitely reflected in the statistics as well. I know a lot of the stats that I've read from first page of Google, but over the last 5 or so years, say that although spirituality isn't decreasing, Christianity is decreasing, and church attendance is decreasing. So that's interesting. It's not as though we've just stopped searching. We don't care. It's that there's something irrelevant or off-putting about traditional church. So
the stats here on the Seventh-day Adventist people that have left, do you still believe in the authority of Scripture as taught by the Seventh-day Adventist Church? 79% of former members say yes, the authority of Scripture. Do you still believe the gift of prophecy manifested in Ellen White? 81% say yes.
Wow, okay. That's high.
What did you think of the Adventist Church at the time you left? 19%, I was angry at the way it treated me. So 20%, one in 5. 17% said it had become irrelevant to my life. 16% said it felt cold and inflexible. 24%, so a quarter, I thought highly of it, but felt I could not live up to its standards.
Oh, okay.
So that's a very interesting, they're very split, and there's large sort of chunks in this particular study that they've conducted. But those are some quite interesting and telling sort of implications to some of those stats. This comes up quite often, Mary Ellen, with the church because of the retention rate. So basically, across the 50 years, they baptized 20 million people into the Adventist Church. This study was released in 2015, so it's a little bit old now, but across the 50 years before that, they had baptized 20 million people, but 13 million had been lost out of that.
13? Yeah.
13 million.
Wow.
So in total, it would have been 33 million across, sorry, those were the members that had stayed and lost. So 33 million in total were baptized, but 20 million of those stayed and the 13 million left. So 39% net loss rate.
Interesting.
That's quite.
That's a lot. Wow.
It's 4 in 10.
Did the research talk about why, or is it just pure statistics at this stage? Or
those were some of those reasons that I mentioned before. Feeling angry at the church or feeling like they couldn't match up to the standards. That's a telling one. It's a quarter of them. Only 8% said that they felt it lacked integrity in its behavior or theology. However, with trends and things happening in the world at the moment, I wonder if that percentage would be higher for young people now, because of some of the sex scandals in the Christian churches, in the Royal Commission here in Australia and things like that. I wonder if they would still feel the high level of integrity of the church. I don't think that's why people leave the church, to be honest, but I think it's why people may be reticent to join the church. That might be another conversation, because of the lack of credibility.
The
McCrindle research that we found just before this conversation, one of the challenges that I noticed that they brought up in their research was a loss of respect for clergy or ministry as a profession. And that's in the broader Australian community, in the Australian context. So perhaps that's why people are not as keen to join the church.
Interesting. Well, I mean, there's certainly a fairly significant level of cognitive dissonance for those who attend church, who are aware of what the church believes and how the church acts. And I think that 24%, I think 24, 25, of people that find that they can't live up to the standards, or even things with, sex scandals and all that, it's amazing how little we recognize these things publicly as challenges. I think, but we're not so bad. Like, I don't think the Adventist Church, and we've got AdSafe and things like that, I think we do own up to a lot of the sex kind of stuff that's happened in the past. But the Christian church as a whole just throws all that under the rug, and then you've got the high court cases and, people being given a pardon for no particular reason, it seems. Anyway, but and like these standards that we live up to, we talk about salvation by faith, and, it's like, works are important, but you're not saved by works, et cetera, but we live as though we do. And so there's this constant like tension there. And, psychologists, I've listened to podcasts where psychologists are interviewed, and they say that is one of the most damaging things to mental health in general, living in a state of cognitive dissonance, because like it just wears you down over time, and you're either abandoning your true beliefs and self for the majority, or actually that's all you're doing, really. So that
leads us to the I guess the debate or the trend in Christianity at the moment that people are picking up on is this idea of deconstruction. Relevant magazine on their website recently, just in the last week, I was reading The Age of Deconstruction and the Future of the Church, an article there. And the guy refers to Richard Rohr, who is a Christian leader, and talks about construction of your faith, which is building your belief system and worldview. I think a lot of us who are born in the church do that as children. We're taught by our parents, we're taught by Pathfinders, by Sabbath school, by the Adventist school that we attend. We might be taught some of these worldview things, and we accept those. Generally, we bring those on board and try and live those out. And then the deconstruction phase, which is challenging that worldview and those subsequent beliefs. And then a reconstruction phase, which is rebuilding a new, more holistic set of beliefs and worldview. In other words, rather than just swallowing everything you've been told by everyone, you're actually trying to find a holistic way. And I guess to answer some of that cognitive dissonance that you're talking about, I don't think true, let's put it this way, maybe not true, the word holistic. I don't think holistic Christian theology and good Adventist theology has cognitive dissonance in it. I think there's tension points, but a proper theology of sin and of grace and of what Jesus has done, I think some of those things, you can avoid cognitive dissonance that gives you mental health problems if you have a holistic theology, a true working practical understanding of some of those concepts. I think the problem comes in when you have it skewed by someone or taught in a skewed sort of way, or when you are not able to mature or grow those beliefs beyond what you've sort of imbibed as a child. So the Paul talks about the milk, when you first become a Christian, and then the richness that comes from going onto a solid diet in that space. And I think some people, when I want to be careful how I say this, because I don't think it's like everyone needs to be a Bible scholar. You don't.
Yeah.
The gospel is incredibly simple. But if you're going to take on board sort of things without, I guess, even understanding them or growing in them yourself, then all you're doing is regurgitating what you've heard, right? And that can be problematic because it doesn't necessarily square with your experience or anything else. It's sort of being shoved. It's a square peg in a round hole being shoved in, and it doesn't fit quite right because you haven't gone through the process of character modification and growth that the Holy Spirit takes you through, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So what I'm not saying, I want to make this clear. I'm not saying that those who leave the church have a immature faith.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that those who leave the church haven't wrestled with these or tried to go through this. But sometimes when we're in the process of deconstructing as a person and relearning, trying to find a more holistic faith, we're pushed out by others who are like uncomfortable by the questions that we're asking or the doubts that we have. If there's so much certainty and so much like you have no space to believe more fully, if there's questions that you have that no one's willing to answer or even engage with, that's a problem. That's what's going to lead you to leave if those things are unaddressed. And so I think there's something to understand in that space. And I think we need to wrestle with it because, as this author sort of claims, deconstruction will sweep deconstruction will sweep Western Christianity into massive reform. He said, deconstruction may be the end of churches in the West, but it will not be the end of Christianity. It's like an upheaval, a period of reformation, revival, change. But it's something that we need to think through and wrestle with because it's happening, it's coming. There's a lot of Christian leaders or worship leaders or sort of famous sort of people that are going through this, and perhaps not as much or not as high profile in Adventism, but there have been a few that I can think of in the past few years who have either left the church or stepped back from ministry in some way. And I think it's worth us thinking through and understanding, because as society goes into this like questioning, where we started with the poem, looking for new meaning and new beliefs, does the church have the answers, and does the church have relevance to those people that are looking for those things?
Yeah.
And can we even keep our own people, our own young people, our own people that we've baptized into the church? Are they being discipled and grown into that holistic sort of faith? I've talked a lot.
Hold that thought. That's definitely
you go.
I was just going to say, there's so many points I could have brought up, but I wanted to let you keep going because it's more relevant. But I think we saw a lot of that deconstruction happen just because of the context of the world last year, and like during, or even this year as well, during COVID, and sort of having done a few interviews with different pastors about their church experience and sort of what their congregations have been doing, and just, my friends in general and things like that. I've just seen this trend of like people stepping back and thinking, why do I do all the things that I do? Why do I go to church and burn myself out on Sabbath when the Bible clearly indicates that it's supposed to be a day of rest? Like, how do I reconcile that? And there's been a lot of questioning. And I think one of the main, practical desires or hopes for the future from that I've seen has been pastors and members alike saying, actually, really big organized churches, and not that there's anything wrong with them, but for a lot of people, it becomes a stumbling block because they cannot reconcile their understanding of God's character and their desire for what the Sabbath and what their faith should look like with the judgment and the hierarchy and the rigidness and like the 9:30 starts or whatever it is of traditional church. So I don't know if we really made any progress because I know my church is back to normal as it always was. I don't know about you.
Yeah. Look, there is a silver lining. There is some light at the end of the tunnel. Mm-hmm. And I think I came across some statistics recently or this week that I'm actually writing a news report together for our record magazine. The South Pacific Division that we're a part of in this part of the world, Australia, New Zealand, the islands, Papua New Guinea, our region has actually experienced something like a 40% increase in baptisms in 2020 compared to 2019, right? Now, Australia and New Zealand, they're kind of stable. They're at a pretty similar level, if not decreased a tad. But Papua New Guinea and TPUM, the Trans-Pacific, both experienced significant growth, like not a year-on-year like fluctuation. This was a huge amount of growth. And in speaking to Pastor Marveni, who's the principal president, of the Trans-Pacific Union, he reflected on how COVID had ruined their plans, like changed their evangelistic plans and stuff. But it made them have to pivot more to the small group model and to the idea of meeting in different ways, and more of an emphasis on the membership sharing their faith and that sort of thing. And the same in Papua New Guinea. They had planned this PNG for Christ, this giant evangelistic campaign. They were planning to have like 1,000 sites across the country where they would preach and do all this stuff. And that all got derailed by COVID. And yet what they found was that what they did locally, what they were able to equip the members to do, was more effective, or not necessarily more effective. Look, it may have done really well, the PNG for Christ program. We'll never know because it didn't happen. But it is this push or this emphasis towards, I guess, the small groups and the more organic, more authentic sort of church meeting styles, rather than the big worship service, everyone in together in the auditorium type thing. So look, I think there is an opportunity for the church to pivot and to learn from this. Marveni, in his comments back to me, Pastor Marveni was saying that the church had become comfortable, and that COVID sort of, the Holy Spirit was using it to shake them up, to get them doing things differently and a bit active again. So, I mean, that is an optimism that I admire, to see that challenge that we all had with COVID in 2020, and to be able to turn that into a ministry opportunity, that's exciting. That's important.
Yeah.
But I think you're right that we've been talking just this week about my local church, what we do, how do we get people back, because they're not as engaged, or the numbers aren't as high as they were. And it's not all about numbers, but what even is church? What is the expression of church? Is it working? Is it going to work from here out, now that everyone's expectations have changed? You know, they've discovered they can watch a sermon and sit through a worship service in their PJs at home. What's the value? What's the community that we can offer? Yeah, where's the value added to those people's lives? So I think that is a challenge that the church is going to have to navigate.
Yep, absolutely. And there's so much anxiety, I think, as well, stepping into a big congregation, that from the get-go, like, it's the classic example. What's that quote by Ellen White? She says something about, love them and then have them change their behavior or something, but we do the opposite. It's like if the guy who smokes and has tattoos comes in and sits up the front of church, we're like, oh, sir, it's a bit, and that's, so like, what is the motivation of coming to church when that's the kind of environment that a lot of churches have? We have a couple of questions or points here I'd love to show on the screen.
Yeah, great.
I accidentally showed them before and I wasn't quite sure what I was doing, but Len Knott, who's watched on Facebook and YouTube, I think, thank you for joining us. He says the fear message is no longer relevant, but I just wanted to follow that up with a question from Linnell, who says, was the unprecedented growth in, I think, the baptism that you were talking about in part due to fear? I think that's an interesting thing to ponder. I don't know if we have an answer, but...
Well, I mean, from the church leaders that I've spoken to or gotten emails from to put this report together, there is an acknowledgement in some ways that the world is an uncertain place and that people are looking for certainty. I will be the last one to sort of say that fear is a good motivational tool. I've written about it and spoken about it, that, love is much more effective and important tool to use than fear. But I'm sure there's some of that, but I don't want to detract from the Holy Spirit, increasing the baptisms that much. Like, I think there's got to be some element of loving relationships. And I think it's very easy to get random strangers into a public evangelism meeting and tell them about the world is ending and the mark of the beast and things like that, and use that fear motivational strategy. But I think when you're in a small group, if you're doing Bible studies in community and you're having that sort of model, it's a little less fear-based. In my experience, it's a lot harder to sort of dehumanize others and to push that fear agenda if people are actually meeting in your house and having a meal together and then doing a Bible study together. I don't think that's as much the emphasis or the element of that. So that's my, I could be wrong. I often am, but that's,
I don't know about that. I think that's
my take on it.
I mean, if like a big evangelist was to preach at you in your living room, it would be a very different thing, and so like you can't treat someone like you do in a big auditorium when you're a meter away.
Right. It's a very different style or model of thing. And I love how we're putting the comments up. This is great.
Me too. I want to put up another one. It's from Len Knott, who says many who leave because their relationship with Jesus is damaged by staying. And I think that is so nail on the head. Yes, I agree. Because I think we by default, just because it's natural to do that. There's the in-group, out-group mentalities. You want to preserve your community. We judge people for leaving and we label them, they've lost the truth. They don't know what they're doing. They've got other priorities. But actually, the thing is, I've been learning something recently about the word integrity, or at least the practice of integrity. A lot of people think that to have integrity as a person means that your behavior never changes, your belief never changes, like you always stay exactly the same person. But in actual fact, you can't help but change. Change is a natural, it's like the only constant in life, right? So you are going to change and your beliefs will develop. And so if you don't go along with that and you don't honor that and avoid the cognitive dissonance by being true to what to an extent, of course, like there's obviously exceptions to this, but to what you're learning and things like that, then you don't have integrity. So if you're staying in a congregation that you've now learned or you believe that isn't serving you, or it doesn't align with your beliefs or isn't serving your community, then by leaving, you actually have integrity. So I think, Len, you make a very good point there.
Yeah, I think, Mary Ellen, a lot of the people that I've seen having some of these conversations on places like Twitter and people that are wrestling with faith, struggling with faith, there's a lot of spiritual and emotional sort of trauma and abuse that some of these people are carrying, and toxic conditions in churches, toxic ministers or toxic church congregations, communities. And I'm not just talking about Adventist churches, but everywhere. But that does include Adventist churches then. There are some of these situations where, yeah, your faith in Jesus would be damaged by staying in that situation.
Yeah, definitely.
We have to acknowledge that. We have to get better at acknowledging that. While still, yes, upholding that the church is flawed and is the body of Christ. God can use other people in community to, like, that's the best expression of Christianity is community, like, being part of Jesus together with others. I think that's so necessary. But does it look like, do you have to stay in the church if that's your only church option because you're in a small sort of town and that's the only church in town? Like, if it's an abusive or toxic situation and it's damaging your faith or your mental health, don't stay in it. Find community, find a church in some other way or online or something. There's options, but don't stay in those churches that are going to damage you further. I think that's a really important point.
Absolutely. Yeah, don't be spiritually manipulated or think that God will think less of you if you leave an organized religious experience. Yeah, definitely. Good point. I just wanted to read out some of the reasons that young Christians leave church. It's just an article by the Barna Group here. Well, there'll be something that comes up from it, but reason one, churches seem overprotective. And I think that's apparently the biggest reason. When they surveyed, 24% of people said this. And apparently it's kind of, the church is so out of touch. And I think in particular, Adventism could be guilty of this because we're very wary of, at least how I was brought up and in my cultural context, I was always told, these movies are not allowed to be watched. And this book, it's off limits because it has spiritual, themes in it or whatever. And so it's just out of touch with reality. And especially today, I would struggle. I don't know how you feel, Jared, bringing up a beautiful daughter in such a strange world, a strange new world that we're living in. But yeah, there's just such a diversity of content to consume. And if the church doesn't address all of that content or provide like a clear basis, and I think the Adventist Church does provide a clear basis, but it's not communicated very well. It's like, there is a spiritual compass there, but are we teaching people how to use that compass properly? I don't know.
My mother sort of helped me in this space growing up, because it wasn't an all or nothing rule. It wasn't no fiction, no movies or no whatever in the house. It was discerning. Use your discernment. Understand what these things are trying to tell you and the spiritual themes here, and avoid those things that are explicitly evil or glorify darkness or glorify bad things or and I think that that's been helpful in my own life, certainly. But yeah, I don't know if you've got some other points there as well, but just on what you're saying, the Barna Group discovered the Future of the Church in Australia report from this last year from McCrindle Research in Australia. Yep. They said that Australians are disillusioned with the church but spiritually hungry.
Yeah, interesting.
Which is interesting. So I'm sorry if you're watching this from outside of Australia, but they're the stats we could find in short notice, and Yeah. McCrindle is a really good group who often research things around the Christian church in Australia. And yeah, they're disillusioned with church, but spiritually hungry. So there's still an openness or a hunger there. But they've some of the forms and some of the things that church has come to represent, they're rejecting, which is quite interesting. And as to go along with some of the other things that they found, it's like putting evangelism and discipleship back in the hands of the congregation, looking for digital opportunities to reach the community and raising and releasing well-rounded leaders. I think all of those things for our young people mean empowering other people and not just expecting the pastor to do everything.
Yeah.
So empowering younger people, empowering our church members to be active, because I think if people are actually being challenged and grown in their faith because they're activating it and they're using it, perhaps they'll be less likely to leave if they feel more ownership of the place that they find themselves.
Both of those points, I think, for me, speak to a real desire and hunger for an experience of God amongst people. When you've got the pastor up the front who is the leader and he's the one who experiences God and shares that, like in theory, I suppose, there's a lot less need for you to do so, for you to do your own Bible study or for you to go out and step out in faith, because he's going to do it for you, That's the traditional model that we've sort of adopted. And with the spirituality point that you made as well, we're still spiritually hungry. In my circles of friends, I have quite a number of people who I know who have turned away from Adventism or turned away from traditional Christianity and gone toward this like mystical Christianity, kind of an arm of Christianity, which I think is super interesting because it really pushes this experiential aspect of God. And like I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it or disagree with some aspects of it, like that's them. But it's sort of like different prayers that they can do, and I don't really understand it. But the core, I think, desire for people that join those kind of groups is to be able to connect with God and have, I guess, it's more feelings than Adventism typically has. But interesting.
You're fairly young, Mary Ellen. Yes. What has been your experience? Do you feel like you've had a season of deconstruction or reconstruction of your faith? Like, is there, do you relate to that sort of, that maybe transition period where it's like, am I going to stay in this thing or am I going to not? Am I committed to this, or am I still, or are you still too young to have been through that? Or have you just decided to skip that phase altogether and you're just like, I'm just curious.
That's a really good question. And I don't know if I can answer that. I'm probably in a period of transition or deconstruction at the moment, I would say. And I guess it's a little ironic, but also it makes sense, having worked at Adventist Record for 2 years now, it's opened my mind a lot, because I'd only ever attended 2 or 3 other churches. And I'm sort of like stick to a church and I serve there. I'm not one of these church hoppers. I don't experience a wide range of Adventism or Christianity. So working here and seeing the diversity of Adventist experience throughout the South Pacific, it's been really eye-opening. And having conversations with people who serve in different contexts, it's just, been really challenging. And so I suppose for me in my local church, that's been a point of cognitive dissonance or tension. But then I guess in a broader perspective, in my own walk with God, the real, like, the Velcro that just keeps catching is this, I guess, distinction between what we believe, because I fully believe in the Adventist doctrine. I think it's beautiful. As you say, there shouldn't be any cognitive dissonance there. But then seeing that and understanding that, but then also seeing how some Adventists behave or treat others, it's just there's such a conflict there that I would say that, yes, I'm definitely in a period, maybe an 18-month prolonged period, but a period nonetheless of deconstruction. And there are certain people that I've had the privilege of interviewing or talking to from around the world who are Adventists or have gone through deconstruction themselves. And that's been a huge help, because seeing that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that there is a way to still live out that belief but not be disillusioned, is encouraging. Yeah. How about you, Jared, being a little older? Not that you're old, you're a little older than me.
Yeah, look, I definitely think it's something I resonate with. The idea, I was sort of church hopping a little bit, and even not attending much. Sort of when I moved out of home / college. I think when you move into state or overseas, or even into a new city or a new suburb, sometimes it can be hard to reconnect with your church, because I no longer had the option of going to church where I'd grown up and where I'd served and where I'd enjoyed learning about God, and where I'd been baptized, and that all of a sudden was no longer possible because I was interstate.
Mm-hmm.
So I did go through a season of feeling very uninvolved in the church, which was different to what I had ever experienced before.
Yeah, okay.
I would say that my life has been from a very young age, I wanted to know more about God, and I wanted to do his will in my life. And I've always stuck through that.
Mm-hmm.
But I have seen my own faith and my own understanding of God, I guess, grow and develop. I have very much got a large amount of respect for those who may be struggling or maybe deconstructing or reconstructing their faith, because it's like I do feel like I've done it maybe over a prolonged period of time, or it's taken a while, and it's maybe not even there yet. Maybe I'm still. I know with COVID, it's been interesting because it's felt like a deconstruction, reconstruction sort of phase as well for my faith.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'm learning more and more, and I feel like I'm growing, and I've had certainly seasons of ups and downs in my involvement and engagement and passion for the church. But I've always loved God and been passionate for God. It's just, how do I relate to the church, I think is the question that we're asking here. And
yeah,
I've always been committed, and my parents, I guess, still attend the same local church. They've been loyal. They rock up every morning, first ones there, last ones to leave. And it's a model for me. Like it's an inspiration to maintain that loyalty. And so that's sort of, I feel like that's hard coded into my DNA. But how can I find new expressions of church? How can I be more active and engaged in my community? What can I do in my cultural and community contexts that I find myself in? Because South Australia is a much different culture to here on the East Coast.
Yeah.
The church culture there is probably slightly more conservative than here on the East Coast. And all of those things I've had to navigate, I guess, through my journey, through my life. I've had to reconcile, like, well, who's doing it right? Everyone here does this, or says this should happen on Sabbath, or is acting like this. Yet when I was growing up, this is how we did it. So which one's right, or is there a middle ground? Like, you have to find it for yourself. And I think that process of finding your own faith, and I guess committing to your own faith, and building that holistic understanding of your own faith, is a process of reconstructing of the faith. It's finding a faith for yourself, not just having a faith passed down from your parents. And I think it's a process that probably, I'm biased because I've had that experience, but I guess we should all go through it. In some sense, we should all go through it. As generations change, as technology changes, we have to find new ways to express and to live out our faith in new contexts. And so I think it's something we shouldn't be afraid of, and we should have more compassion for those who do struggle with it, because we can either help them and guide and mentor them through it, or we can push them out. We can push them out of the church and give them very negative feelings about the church because of how we treat them, how we walk with them, and how we talk about it, how we view some of those things.
Absolutely. We've just got a bunch of really good comments that have just come through, which I'd love to put on the screen.
Yeah.
First is from Rom, who says, I don't think I don't think people leaving the church is the issue. I'd be more concerned about people leaving their faith, if that makes sense. Yes, it makes sense. Absolutely. I think that's,
100% Rom. Definitely. But I do think that sometimes the challenge is that our faith, if we're not using our faith, it stagnates and it disappears.
Yeah.
So sometimes a church community reminds us to use our faith, and we may go through seasons where we're less or more engaged in church, but there's always that accountability, like reminder, like, oh, I should be doing such and such a thing. Or, you know, when we've got a community around us, when we try and do it on our own, in my experience, at least when I've had seasons away from church, not attending church a lot, my faith does struggle to stay at the same level. I've found that's just my experience. I find that I can stagnate or drift away. So I 100% agree with Rom's statement, but I think there's some nuance that we have to just like navigate if we're gonna, be real about things and be honest about that.
I feel like that's the one thing I admire about you. Not most, but like one of the top qualities of you, Jared. You're always about the nuance. You're like, should we say that differently? Like, how do we include them in this conversation?
I'm a writer. I have to think about how words have meaning and what meaning we're giving to people. And
absolutely,
we don't want to alienate people by the words that we use.
No,
but you said you had some other comments there.
Yeah, we've got 4 more actually. Linnell says, seeing a diversity of practice and belief is valuable to developing resilience, challenging but essential. And I think 100%. I'd like to add here that if we want to have a practical takeaway for people who might feel disillusioned or like unmotivated or whatever, attend a different like Adventist church or even a different denominations church, just to sort of have a refreshing of, because we just get so caught in ruts and routines. It's just, I think, challenging but essential, as Linnell says.
If you can.
If you can, of course. If you
some
can.
Regional limitations or transport limitations, and
if not, there's plenty of sermons online you can watch. So I guess that's another alternative. Daniela, who we interviewed a couple of weeks ago, you can pick up a comment here. She said it's very important that this is when you were talking about your church in Adelaide. She's saying that it's important that they keep in touch with young people and introduce them to new churches, because it's very easy to drop out. And I think it's kind of sad the way that some churches do treat the young people that leave or go to Adventist or whatever, because kind of like, that they've left us now, we're not going to talk to them anymore.
It is easy to drop out, and she's right that new churches should be open and welcoming, but sometimes they are. Sometimes the onus is on the individual. I know in my experience, like, I didn't want to stay for lunch. I didn't want to necessarily talk to people I didn't know. I didn't feel comfortable. And so I would bump in and bump out, like after Sabbath school and before the sermon, like not before the sermon, before the prayer at the end sort of thing. The sermon, got the prayer, and then as soon as I could get out, I would try and escape, And so it wasn't that people weren't loving or accepting or friendly to me. It was just that I didn't give them the opportunity to do that. So there is, it does go both ways, but I think we definitely need to, parents and friends and churches of local people, when the kid's moving interstate, reach out to who you know, reach out to whoever you can, and try and tee them up with some friends and family there, because one of the churches I probably attended most regularly in Melbourne was the church that my cousins went to, because I had a connection there. I had a foot in the door. Distance was an issue, but I would try and go there because they were there. So that was a nice connection for me.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is the last comment I'm going to show. It's from Tamika. She says, experiencing God is a difficult or uncomfortable subject for Adventists. We might want to talk about God in our week and what answers to prayer we may have had, but are reluctant to share so as not to be put in the mystical Christianity category, as you called it. I think we can, as a church community, improve. And I think that's a very, very good point. Yeah, we tend to glorify intellectualism as a denomination, and there's nothing wrong with knowing the Bible at all. But if you're knowing the Bible at the expense of experiencing God, I think, there's definitely.
I think over the years we've diminished the Holy Spirit's role in the Adventist Church. We've been scared of being too charismatic or strange signs and symbols. And I think that the Holy Spirit really wants to go alongside us and give us opportunities in our lives to test and exercise our faith. And I really believe if you don't use it, you lose it. And if
Yeah.
we're not using our faith, if we're not sharing our faith, if we're not experiencing God's stories, something that challenged me just the other day, I was thinking, what's the God story that's most recent in my life? What can I sort of talk about? And we've been blessed with a daughter. And that was a miracle for us to get pregnant and to have a child, and something we'd always wanted and talked to God about. But that she's a year old now. What's happened since then? What's happened in the year? And it's just been full on. It's been raising a child, dealing with COVID, working remotely, doing stuff. And it's like, am I allowing God to use me in my day-to-day interactions? In who have I brought into church, or even have I preached shared my testimony, preached a good sermon lately? It's a challenge to me. What are my recent God stories this week or these days? And that's, to me, that's experiencing God. Is God, are we relying on God because we're at the front, the cold face, we're in the middle of things and we need to lean on God because he gets us through those things? Or are we just like pretty comfortable and doing our own thing?
It's a challenge. It's a real challenge. I struggle with this too, is that day to day, I don't really experience God in that deep way. And weeks can go by, it's the same kind of thing, you're sort of stagnant and you really want him to be there and you want to do his will, but like, how do you do his will when you're sitting at a computer for 8 hours and then you got a baby at home, you got to make dinner, you got to like drive here? It's just a lot. So bringing God into those very banal, I guess, things in our lives is important. Anyway, it's 5 o'clock.
We got to go.
Probably should go. Thanks for your wisdom, Jared, as always. It's been great to chat.
Thank you, Mary Ellen.
And thank you, everyone.
Pleasure.
It has been. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll try and get to your comments in a little bit and like them, reply to them all if we can. Really, some really great insights from you. And also, I'll post the link to our email now. So if you want to do that, you can do that.
Thanks for joining us, guys, and we'll see you next week. It's great to chat with you guys each week. It's a real highlight of the week. So thanks a lot for joining us.